you're now I got to go back to recording, and I'm
And
going
if you
to
decide
go.
you don't want to record it to Facebook, that's okay too.
I'm good. I'm going to do the Facebook right now. Let's see if this works, everybody. Hey, Pam, we're about 30 seconds behind you, so we're going to go
That's all right.
live.
Some people are still coming on,
Share.
so we're okay.
Okay. Here's on my page, Belleville Lake, Belleville Area Chamber of Commerce. Now we should be
It says
about 30.
live.
Okay, it says live. Hey, everybody, this is Mike Cole call from the Belleville Area Chamber of Commerce. You're seeing us live on Earth Day, April 22nd, 2021. So today we are honored to have Kathleen Klein, a community relations representative from Waste Management, who is going to provide us with an outstanding presentation on waste and waste management, sustainable energy. And I'm not going to go into it because that's her thing. And we are live on Facebook. So Facebook people, we cannot see your questions, but the people that have signed up for the webinar, we can. So please use your chat or your Q&A and ask all the questions, and we'll get them answered as we go. So we'll have Kathleen, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you go right on. And thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you all for being here today. I guarantee when you come away from this today, you are going to know a lot more than you ever did before about your garbage. And it's really, I've been in the industry for over 30 years. It's absolutely a fascinating industry to be engaged and involved in. Earth Day is really special, although I truly believe every day should be Earth Day, not just once a year. But let me take you through some of the fascinating history, social shifts and changes, and then we're going to end up with a conversation about what's going on in the state of Michigan. So a little bit of history, and did my slide move okay? Everybody seeing this? Okay.
Yes.
So some of you, depending upon your age, I don't know in the audience what age range you guys fall into, but I'm a boomer, late stage boomer, almost next gen. So I remember Love Canal in the 70s. I remember news in the late 60s of how rivers were so polluted they were catching on fire. Earth Day came about as a result of the massive contamination we had taking place in society. So then we had the garbage barge in the 80s that, if anyone remembers, that barge floated around to different countries trying to find a place to offload its waste because it hadn't loaded its waste appropriately in the first place. So then we had the whole evolution of this industry, why you have big companies like Waste Management, and we are the largest environmental services provider in the nation right now. The reason big companies like us became involved and engaged in this is because private and government owned facilities, they started to become undercapitalized, or the cost of doing this work became so extensive that you wound up having to have large companies that are invested in. We trade on the New York Stock Exchange, so anyone and everyone, large institutional investors, support our being here by virtue of their investment in this industry. So come about the 80s, we knew that we needed to write better laws governing the disposal of solid waste. And with that came new design standards and engineering standards for landfills. And when that law came into effect in the early 90s, we literally went from 8,000 landfills across the United States to less than 3,000. Some of you may remember this by virtue of the fact that it was in the early 90s that our communities started to wasn't mandated, we weren't forced to do it, but we were asked to start doing recycling. And the reason that that came about was that if you have fewer landfills having to manage the same volume of waste, what can we as a society do to make those landfills last to handle that volume, right? So we start pulling recyclables out of the waste stream. We also, if you remember, it was in the early 90s that we had to start pulling yard waste out of our waste stream. That had to be sourced, and that was mandated. That is by law, cannot go to landfills. It's required to be treated separately, and it goes to composting. So we have improved landfill design, but it becomes very expensive to build these landfills. The cost is around $500,000 an acre versus what might have been maybe $100,000 an acre before these new regulations came into effect. So that started to impact the size of landfills and the fact that they became more regionalized so that they could handle a region of waste. It's what we call a waste shed, where the distance of getting the waste to the landfill, including the transportation cost, needs to start making sense. So we have regionalized landfills. They tend to be built in urban areas, but also in rural areas. They come with host community agreements where you have to have a negotiation with the community so that the community receives some benefits from hosting you as a landfill. Because as you can imagine, nobody wants a landfill in their community, right? Um, I don't know that that's ever going to change, but I think the relationship and um, the partisanship in all of this is much better understood in this day and age. What many of you might not know is that there has been a county solid waste planning process in place where every county in the state of Michigan has to know and understand its population and its projected population growth over 10 years and the amount of waste that that population is going to generate. So as we go about our day-to-day lives for the last 20 plus years, this solid waste planning process has been governing the siting of landfills. And when are we getting to where we might be running out of space and need to site additional disposal capacity? So that's what's been going on, right? Recycling and yard waste. The state has done an amazing job of understanding. Every landfill in the state of Michigan reports the volume that it receives, the counties that it receives it from. All of that gets reported up to the state. So the state has an amazingly good handle on the solid waste being generated and collected in Michigan. They did not have the same information gathering taking place around recycling and yard waste. It wasn't necessarily mandated, it wasn't regulated, these facilities. So there wasn't as, they were regulated to a certain extent, but not to the extent that landfill and solid waste disposal was. So now where we're headed with recycling and yard waste is more or less the same that we've been with solid waste, where we need to get a better understanding of these volumes, knowing and understanding, is there reasonable access to disposing of recyclables and yard waste? And Governor Snyder was the first to really want to take this on. In Michigan, we only recycle about 15% of our waste, and that includes having the bottle bill in place, when in most places, your average rate of recycling is 35%. So Governor Snyder wanted to take the state to improving its recycling rate, and there's a reason for that, a business reason for wanting to improve our recycling rate. So he started bringing NGOs, government, industry together about, I want to say 5 years ago. It was a massive undertaking and an incredibly collaborative undertaking to know and understand the existing solid waste laws and how do we rewrite them so that we can start to create what's called a sustainable materials management planning process that will be more regional and allow for better, more efficient gathering of these formerly waste materials that we now consider to be important materials for remanufacturing. So what we're seeing is Part 115 is the law that has regulated that. There are current House bills 4454 to 4461 that are moving through review in the House. Once the House approves it, it then needs to move to the Senate to approve. And how is this all going to impact us? For most of us, today I'm going to cover briefly this Next Cycle Michigan initiative that's in place, because this is where businesses and entrepreneurs, if there's an interest, can start to take place in this economic effort to create a sustainable materials management program. So the reason that we feel this is so important, or that the state feels it's so important to do this, I say we as in society or the state as a whole, when we start to develop the sustainable materials management effort, we create 138,000 potential jobs in Michigan. It can represent $9 billion in annual labor income, 33.8 billion in economic output. So this whole concept of sustainable materials management, it's not just a dream, it's not just a feel-good thing. There's a hard and fast business concept behind it and why it's important that we do these things. So it's about getting best practices and a framework in place to help us as a state achieve this 45% recovery rate. So you can see the different steps that take us there. We've been doing the collection and the processing. We've worked to struggle through the end market usage. And we saw a lot of that happening in the last, I want to say 8 to 10 years. And it created issues where some of those end markets were getting hard to find for recyclables. But the industry has really, manufacturing and those of us that manage these materials have worked really hard together, and we're still working to create these end markets. I'm involved in the education and engagement and have been for the last 12 years. And I'm really pleased to say that I think the education and engagement is much better than it was when I first started in this role in 2008. Where we're at right now and what we're talking about today is the fact that the state of Michigan is finally working on writing, supporting policies, writing and then passing, supporting legislative policies that will help further drive this effort. And with that becomes the need for funding. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about that today, but I'm not going to go into deep discussions on any of these components. I just want to make people aware of this effort. So then when we talk about Next Cycle Michigan, it's an effort funded by the state of Michigan, and it's designed to handle purpose-driven goals, get companies the research and the information and the partnerships in place that they need, and help them apply for grants in order to create these innovative changes. So again, there's more in-depth information on Next Cycle Michigan. Funding is always a big part of any legislative effort or change, and that was tackled and in place in 2019. So that's one of the first hurdles that we have that funding now, the state does, in order to move this effort forward. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Michigan Renew Fund, but there's more information in this presentation a little bit further down. So the funding is going to help provide technical support, subject matter expertise, data. Data is so critical in this day and age, and we have so many better avenues for collecting it and analyzing it. The Renew Michigan effort and these entrepreneurial efforts can be as small as a repair center in an underserved community. It can get as broad as to bringing major manufacturers and remanufacturers to the state of Michigan. Once we create a steady stream of recyclables and compost yard waste material to feed to compost facilities, then you start to encourage economic development. You start to become attractive to these new industries that want to come here because we have now created a steady stream of this material that they need for their remanufacturing. So it also involves regional planning where 10 communities or more or fewer, depending upon where we're at and how heavily concentrated populations are, working together to create new disposal facilities, whether it's a material recovery facility or recycling facility, whether it's a composting facility, it can be a biodigester. There's just a host of different efforts that will come to play that will require this regional planning. And then we can get into even specifics like helping our local microbrewers recycle bags from hops. So it's a very inclusive, expansive opportunity that you might want to get into to explore Next Cycle Michigan. It's also meant to improve equity potential. So opportunities for new minority businesses and enterprises. And I always say, working for large corporate America waste management, there are always opportunities in this industry for the entrepreneurs. They come in and they can fill a niche where maybe we can't quite fill that niche because we're looking and working harder on the bigger scope and size. So there's plenty of opportunity for entrepreneurs. Community wealth building with new investments in underserved communities, plenty of opportunity there. Equitable and fair access to economic opportunities. Next Cycle Michigan is designed to address all of these initiatives. So why is all this so important? What is it about recycling that maybe people don't always know about? We like to feel good about recycling, that something is being made into something new, so we put it in our collection bin. But what's more important is that when we recycle, we actually begin to save massive amounts of energy. And when we save energy, we begin to save all the resources that it takes to make that energy. So when you look at this graph, know and understand that when you make an aluminum can from a recycled aluminum product, you're saving 92% of the energy that it would have taken to make that first item from scratch. With copper, it's 90%. With plastic, 87%. These are incredible energy savings that we garner when we recycle. You can see glass down at the very bottom. Glass continues to be a challenge because the energy recovery isn't as great and the end use markets for it aren't that developed yet in the United States. But nonetheless, when we save energy, we save critical resources. And will there be a cost to this? I'm sorry to say, yes, there will. There should be a cost to anything that we do in our everyday living. Cost of energy, water, waste management, recycling management, composting, yard waste management. There will be some cost, but it's important for us, and you're going to see in a moment the importance of it internationally, nationally, globally, because of the entire effort behind recycling also starts to greatly impact and mitigate global climate change. And a lot of people don't always associate global climate change to recycling. How do they relate to each other? It's really through this energy savings and resource savings. And it also reduces greenhouse gases. When we start to save energy, we start to have an immediate impact on reducing those greenhouse gas emissions, which can be attributed to global climate change. And I always say, I think it's important for me to say that whether you believe in the impacts of global climate change, whether we're creating it or we're not creating it, I'm not here to argue that. But what I can tell you is that everybody is getting behind this effort. There are people who do believe in the science of this, to the fact that it's creating a societal shift. And what I mean by a societal shift is this conversation we're going to have on environmental, social, and corporate governance. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that term, ESG. It really just started coming into conversations in my world more strongly. And I literally, I think the last year, maybe two. But this, there's
Kathleen, I'm going to
Go ahead.
interrupt there. On a global contract basis, I work with a lot of companies around the world, and that is now a part of their terms and conditions that we have to comply to certain ESG,
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
and we're getting amendments to our contracts. So this is extremely, this is global. This is all over.
Yes.
This is,
Yes.
yes. I sorry to interrupt, but I do wanted to
No, that's good.
highlight
I'm
that.
glad you can give a personal example, and the next few slides are going to show how important this has become. So if you're not familiar with the terms ES and G, environment is a company's impact on the environment. Investors and businesses are looking at each other to see what kind of impact do we have on, what does the company do? What's the carbon footprint of the company? All of these impacts that have an impact on environment. And then social. How does the company improve its social impact, whether it's in its immediate community where it's operating, whether it's nationally, globally, environmentally? What is the social impact? And then the impact of governance. How does the company's broad management drive positive change? And I can tell you, we're seeing this. In the last year at Waste Management, we have rolled out a commitments and values program where we have done introductions to all of our 45,000 plus employees about what this company, Waste Management's commitments and values are, so that everyone who works with us knows and understand how we govern ourselves, why we feel it's important to be purpose driven for positive change, so that everybody knows. They don't just come to work every day. They know that this is truly a part of our commitment and value system. And we're seeing more and more this conversation. Like I said, it's happening. Forbes, Wall Street Journal are reporting on this. This is a graph that I think tells the entire story of my existence in this community relations and public education field since 2008. Look at where the graph shows the conversation about ES&G was in 2010. And it was really flat up until all of a sudden, I want to say 2019 is where it really skyrocketed. And even if we look at it in terms of, I can't say what really precipitated the growth in conversation, but you can see the trajectory of it. And when a large investment company like BlackRock, I believe they're the largest on the planet, when they start driving this whole attention to investing in net zero transition, this isn't just a trend or a fad anymore. This is everybody recognizing a global imperative to really do what we can to mitigate global climate change. So any questions around any of that so far? Here's the other thing.
Just I'm going to make another quick announcement. Hey, for those that have been signing on throughout this, please use your chat or your Q&A thing down on the bottom or top of your screen, depending on which operating system, and we'll answer your questions as we go. So, but no, there's nothing right now, Kathleen. Go ahead.
Okay, so from this graph to more on, this might be something that you can relate to. This Carbon Disclosure Project is a database that has existed since 2002. Up until recently, they had about 8,000 companies on board, but in the last year, they had their highest number of companies signing on. And what the Carbon Disclosure Project does is it's a database where companies are required to answer questions about their ESG, their environmental impact, their social impact, their governance. And by virtue of creating this database, it provides several things. So we all know institutional investors, there are over 515 of them, and they control over $106 trillion in assets. Those institutional investors are looking at companies' performance on this CDP website. And they're in their quarterly calls with us. They're asking us these questions about ESG. The other important thing of it is 150 plus major purchasers, major businesses who control $4 trillion in purchasing dollars. They use the CDP database to go into and see what companies are doing what things around ESG and making decisions about who they're going to purchase from. So that we're starting to see this circular effect of everybody supporting this effort. 9,600 companies now reporting on CDP, highest ever. Again, it's not a trend. It's not a flavor of the month. This is a major societal shift that, being in the industry for 30 plus years, I can see and feel, and it's happened more in the last 5 than in the first 25 that I've been in the industry. It's all really good stuff. So to bring us up to date on the state, more closer to home again, the legislative effort that's moving through the House right now, Part 115 is being revised. These are the different bills that will make up Part 115, and they highlight the different aspects of the bill. Let me tell you this, I came on board when Part 115 was already in place. So it was already a piece of legislation that we were all just living under. To rewrite that and watch the process of rewriting current legislation, it's phenomenal. It's mind-numbing. It's a huge effort, but it's been incredibly collaborative. So I want to say that there's a lot of momentum supporting this effort. There might be some things that still need to be fine-tuned in terms of language, but we like to make everyone aware that this is happening because it's really designed to create this circularity of recycling. And the reason that circularity of recycling is so important is because picking it up isn't recycling. It's not recycled until it's actually being remanufactured into something new, right? And that's something we can lose sight of. So this Michigan Recycling Coalition website is a great place, as well as EGLE, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, the state of Michigan site, to provide information on the backstory to how we've gotten to where we're about to present this new legislative effort and this new sustainable materials management. You can see some of the associations that have been involved in the effort. There were a couple of committees that sat and came together and really hashed out the meat and potatoes of how to get this legislation in front of the House. Compliance and enforcement is important with any legislative effort. That's where the cost can come in. You can't pass a legislation trying to create operational efficiencies and excellence in an industry if you don't also have an ability to enforce it. So a lot of people might not know this, but every landfill goes through quarterly inspection. The representatives from EGLE, the Solid Waste Division at the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, visit our landfills, every landfill in the state of Michigan, whether it's Waste Management's or any other landfill, once a quarter. And they come in and they review our operations. They walk the site. They look at our record keeping. They're looking for anything that we may not have done appropriately. That same level of oversight needs to exist when you start to build material recovery facilities, recycling facilities, when you're managing and building and operating compost facilities. Because once you create that steady stream of the supply chain, you need to make sure that those facilities are operating in compliance. And you also need to create a level playing field so that companies coming in to build and develop and invest in these industries, everybody's operating at the same level. So that's where the enforcement comes in, and that's where the cost of managing these systems comes in. I won't go into much more detail on that, but it's important to know that landfills don't just exist in and of themselves. They're highly hyper regulated, and there's a cost to doing that regulation, and that's for the benefit of the environment as a whole for each of us. So we've talked about how the bill will be funded. There's more information available on the Renew Michigan Fund website through EGLE, Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. Again, this website, Michigan Recycling Coalition, provides good information, short, brief information on what the House bills all mean. And there may be a time where you as individuals or as businesses want to take action on this. Let your House representatives know how you feel about this legislation. It will be important that each of us as individuals know and understand how this major shift is happening and whether we support it. This particular slide just shows the Renew Michigan Fund and how that money is used. What's interesting, 65% of that revenue in the Renew Michigan Fund is used for environmental cleanup and redevelopment. That benefits all of us. That's the state going in and identifying what we call brownfields or contaminated sites. And a lot of urban renewal and urban redevelopment happens around these environmental cleanups. So that revenue is important for those efforts. 13% of the revenue is to be used for waste management, oversight of landfills, as I just talked about, post-closure monitoring and maintenance, because landfills do have post-closure periods. You don't just get to close a landfill and walk away. They need to be monitored for 30 years beyond their closure. And the state is following and looking at that. Companies that own landfills are required to also bear the burden, the financial burden of monitoring and maintaining those sites for 30 years beyond their closure. And is 30 years enough? Those are some of the other things that are being reviewed in this Part 115 rewrite. And then 22% of the Renew Michigan Fund is revenue that will be used to develop the recycling programs that we're hoping to do. To also create that regional planning effort so that municipalities and different units of government there's funding available to help them develop this regional planning, because this is going to take some work. It's going to be a heavy lift, but I see a lot of it already happening and taking place. So again, as I said earlier, it isn't recycling. Picking it up isn't recycling. It's not really being recycled until it's being remanufactured into new goods and services. That's what creates a circular economy. And I can tell you from the conversations I have with school kids that often, first of all, we need to know our 3 R's. And if you don't know the 3 R's, I'll remind you, they are reduce, reuse, and recycle. But when I would ask the kids on a school bus which one's the most important, their hands will all fly up for recycle. It's recycle, recycle. Well, our CEO will be the first one to tell you we cannot recycle our way out of our consumptive lifestyle. Critical are the first 2 R's, and they're actually in order of importance. We need to focus on reducing. We need to reuse when and if we can. And then if we can't do either of those, recycling is critical. But picking it up isn't recycling. We have to create the circular economy that allows it to be remanufactured into new goods and services. So waste management, we were caught up in the same kind of old mindset where our collection carts that we put out on the curb for residents and communities, we wanted our green and gold colors. Those were important to us for branding. But all of a sudden it occurred to us, this company Cascade Engineering out of Michigan had been coming to us wanting us to buy their eco carts because they were made out of recycled plastic content. But we had kind of been hung up on our colors for too long. And in the last, in 2019, or was it 2020? It was 2020, I think we made the announcement that we were committing. If we're going to pick up this plastic from your curbsides, we as a company that put these carts out there, we need to commit to being a part of that circular economy. And Waste Management is now buying its eco carts from companies using recycled content. So we're now starting to provide an end product, remanufactured product for the very recyclables that we pick up from your homes. So that was one of the commitments we made 2 years ago. And then this year, our commitment was we are starting to purchase uniforms made out of a fabric called Reprieve. You can Google Reprieve and learn all about it. This again is fiber. If you don't know this about polyester, polyester is made from hydrocarbons. Plastic is made from hydrocarbons. So plastic bottles can be recycled and made into the very same type of fiber that we would make polyester from. And that type of polyester fiber can create uniforms, recycled carpeting, fabric upholstery for automobile interiors or in-home interiors. So Waste Management has made a commitment, and I think several other large companies that have need for large uniform supply are purchasing uniforms made out of this material. So again, another commitment of ours to be a part of this circular economy. We're picking it up. Now we're going to start purchasing materials that use these recycled materials. Another good one, here's one we can all practice. If you go to an office supply store and you see paper made from trees and paper made from recycled content, unfortunately right now the paper made from recycled content might be more expensive. So we might wind up opting for the cheaper paper made from trees. But until we start to create the higher demand for paper made from paper, economies of scale eventually kick in and that product starts to become equal in cost to the product made from trees. And for all the paper, think about how much paper we throw away and recycle every day. We have to start creating that end use product that we're willing to purchase in order for that material to find its way into the cycle. A lot of our toilet paper is made from recycled content as well, if you didn't know that. And you can, on the shelf, look for those products: napkins, paper plates, toilet paper, office paper, paper made from recycled content versus paper made from trees. So I like to really share this information for people who are concerned about the different value systems of the different generations. I am very excited about Next Gen, and I lump a lot of the different, any of the youth coming up behind us all in one, what I call Next Gen category. They are incredible. They are going to be the next greatest generation because for several things. They have the education that earlier generations might not always have had access to. They have the technology, which we know is just phenomenal in this day and age. They are living in a much more globally connected world than we were in the past. So the shared global thinking is happening so much more fluidly and quickly, and it's creating a resilience and a shared responsibility in that generation that maybe didn't always exist before when we were living in more isolated circumstances. So if you look at this chart in greater detail, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail here, but just the purple line represents past thinking and how it's starting to see a downward trend. And then the yellow and the blue are starting to show the new ways of thinking about how we design and develop and conduct ourselves in society. And it's really a fascinating shift. So again, this just gives you a snapshot of the massive amount of materials that are being collected and recycled. Waste management, even though the recycling markets were struggling in the last 5 years, we have continued to make investment in recycling infrastructure to the tune of $100 million a year over a 2-year period, with more investments slated. Last year, I'm not sure what the numbers were yet. I think that information is coming together in our 2020 sustainability report, which might already be published. I haven't seen it yet. And then in 2021, we know that we're bringing more facilities online as well. And that's all investment in what we call this internal infrastructure. Because what people might not know and understand, a lot of our recyclables were going overseas to be remanufactured into goods and services. And some of it still is, but so much of it was that when countries like China started to get too much, and a lot of contamination in those materials, they shut us off. And when they shut the US off, that created a reality check for us that internally and within the United States, we needed to grow and develop our own internal infrastructure to manage these recyclables. So here are some, boy, I feel like I flew through that. I hope I didn't talk too fast for you guys. These are some links that are available for you to go in and study some of this information a little more in depth. The last one I didn't really speak about, but waste management does belong to the Michigan Waste and Recycling Association. The MWRA was also instrumental in these conversations around the Part 115 solid waste law update. So it's been incredibly collaborative, and I think that's important for people to know and understand. And go ahead.
Just real quick too, guys, I put if you want a copy of this presentation, I put an email address in the chat. So just copy my email address, send me an email, and I will send you a PDF version, because there's an awful lot of links that you can't copy and paste real quick there. But, and go ahead,
Yeah,
Kathleen. I just wanted to let you know.
We'll get those to you. And again, I'm not going to play this video because it can create some technical challenges, but this video will also be in the PDF. And I don't mean for it to be self-promoting, because that's not my purpose in being here today. But what's really fascinating about this YouTube video is that it presents how differently our whole concept of waste has become. It's not something we just get to toss off and it magically disappears once a week from the curb. It's become, and actually, to be honest, we did such a good job of that over the last several decades that we as individuals kind of got disconnected from our part in all of this. And the conversations that have taken place in the last 10 years, and more so even in the last 3 to 5, we're really seeing people beginning to take more personal accountability for the role that each of us individually plays in this. And I think that the video, Waste Management's video, shows how differently we think about it with our customers as well. It's not just about providing you a price quote and a dumpster anymore. It's so much more integrated into the understanding of what you're producing as a waste stream. Can you make different choices to lessen the waste that you're generating, and how can we help do that with you? And then what are the carbon imprint implications of all of these changes? It's so much more sophisticated. So if you take the time to look at that link, that's what you'll see by virtue of that. And then I think, again, I like to remind everybody today is Earth Day, but I also ask that we be conscientious and that Earth Day should really be every day, not just once a year, but hail that we do celebrate it at least once a year. Plant a tree. Trees are really important right now if you can do that. And with that, here's my contact information. I do have Facebook and Twitter feeds that you're welcome to follow. And now if there's any Q&A, I'm happy to have an interactive conversation with people.
I don't see anything in the question answers, but I'll give some people time to think while you do that.
Okay.
Yeah, people are asking for the presentation. A couple
Okay.
slides ago, you talked about all the legislation that's going through. What's the temperature inside the legislature about this? I noticed both sides of the aisle were represented on that one screen. With all
Yes, I'm going to go back to that because I do think that that's important to see that there is bipartisan support.
That's the one I would say. Yes.
Yeah, there's been bipartisan support, and there's been a lot of positivity around this. I think people really know and understand that. I'll tell you what, if anyone is ever fortunate enough to take a tour at my landfill and Woodland Meadows at Michigan Avenue 275, when I have a school bus full of kids up there, from the top of that landfill, I can point to 5 other landfills within the view on the horizon. And that's when we start to get the understanding that we can't just keep building garbage mountains. We really have to get more thoughtful. And that slide that I showed about next generation, kids are going to college now and getting degrees in chemical engineering and packaging engineering, and they are designing for the circular economy. They are not designing products to become waste at the back end. They're designing for that product to always be put back into circulation. So we're really seeing a phenomenal shift happening right now. It's really exciting to see this, even though we're being hit with so many other issues right now. I feel very positive about it.
Yeah, I've spent the last 20 years underneath the underneath the hood in automotive design and engineering and manufacturing, and it's absolutely amazing
Isn't it?
what what the designers used to do 20 years ago compared to what they do today. There's kind of a, you think green from the get-go is what they're talking about. You really have to figure out, hey, we're going to give you extra points, Mr. Supplier, if you can supply that in a
Yes.
recycled or recyclable product. We went through something that you might want to add to one of your presentations. We went through a study with one of the major material manufacturers for plastic, and we recycled it and used it 10 different times and found out that only 4% loss of integrity of the product after the 10th recycle. So
Yeah.
so even if people say it's weaker, it's not. You
Right.
can build a strong product with recycled material. So
Yeah. Yeah. And again, remember how much energy was saved by repurposing those already produced plastics and
exactly.
recycling them versus mining oil out of the earth, shipping it, any of these materials, mining it out of the earth, shipping it overground to factories where it's produced once, shipping it out to goods. Recycling just makes sense. It really
Yeah.
does. And then even more so when we talk about the reduction in global climate change that it can bring about.
Okay. So it
All
doesn't look
right.
like there's any more questions. I think I'm just going to say thank you. This was a fantastic presentation. I'm glad I recorded it. Hopefully there's a lot of people on Facebook that are watching it as well. For those of you that do want to get more of these types of webinars and workshops and things like that, one of the things at our chamber is that we do a monthly webinar series. Last month, we did a webinar on inclusion, not inclusion, but a minority certification, women's business certification. We're doing an economic summit next month. And if you want to get, all you have to do is look at our newsletter out there. You can sign on by simply texting back to work, and that's BACC, the number 2, work, to the number 22828. Real simple. Back to work to 22828. You can be automatically put on our email address or our email list, and you'll get a newsletter every Monday and Thursday. And we want to thank our corporate sponsors, along with Kathleen from Waste Management being here today. You'll see the corporate sponsors over to my left here, or to my right, whatever. I'm on a mirror here, so I'm not sure exactly where I'm pointing. But Edward Jones and T-Mobile and A Design Line, Moving the Mitten, these are our corporate sponsors that help us bring all of our members and the community all of this content. So Kathleen, thank you for an outstanding presentation. Thank you very much.
And I would encourage, if there are other chambers that did tune in to listen in today, you might want to consider having someone from Next Cycle Michigan give a presentation to businesses on how they can be a part of this entrepreneurial effort, and the funding mechanisms and the partnerships that are available. And even Michigan Recycling Coalition, if you wanted to bring them in to give a more thorough briefing on the legislative effort. Those are 2 more opportunities to get your businesses informed, because it will impact all of us.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. And I think we're just going to sign off, and you guys have a great day, and go plant a tree, right?
There you go.
So
go plant a tree.
There you go.
Thank you.
Do something. Take action. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.